Oh, I'm already breaking the fast. Eggs and shrimp. Don't try it. But hey, I want to tell you what's coming. I just taped this Mark's Headroom. There's an intro, and I cover some technical issues, explain why I didn't get it one out last week. I talk a little bit about fasting and my content output. And then I go and I tell you about my new book, The Gap, and the concept around that. I talk about the idea of transparency and how powerful that is today in society. I use Iran today as an illustration about how that can complicate our lives with more information and nothing to do with it. And it creates a kind of a global stressor. And then I talk about integrity, my calling, maybe yours, and a spiritual view that I keep finding myself coming back to in my life. And then I speak a little bit about language, division, and violence. Big issues, huh? And inherited anger and social systems that we all inherit. And then finally, I talk about power, failure, and then I close out. Hope you enjoy this one. Hi, welcome back. Mark's Headroom. Sorry about last week. The audio, interestingly, from last Friday was non-existent. I don't know. I use a Rode wireless system. It's pretty high end. I've got a backup this time, so hopefully the extra caution will help me deliver the content. I just didn't feel like retaping a whole hour of improv, and I was also breaking my fast whenever I was discovering that everything had fallen apart. So I had to kind of roll with it and accept something that I don't normally do because I mix this engineering mindset with, um, kind of a rigorous approach around the framework that I feel like I need as an artist and as a solo artist to deliver some content. And, sometimes that happens. So I feel, I don't know, I felt really had a lot of mixed feelings last Friday, and I had to take some of my own medicine and just kind of accept what happened or what the universe, had handed me or the few of us who tune into this. So anyway, I'm back here for another episode of Mark's Headroom, where I break a week-long or a 5-day fast before I eat for a couple of days. Been doing this as I look back on my notes for about 5 years now. And last week I talked about some interesting things, and I'm not going to try to force myself to bring that, all back here for this episode today. But I will say that I've completed a few things this year as I looked back last week, and that felt pretty good. I mean, I've put out probably well over 600 long form videos, and it may actually press closer to 800. And then I've worked with those and split those out into several shorter videos on 3 channels: Mark's Headroom here, and Transcendent, which is a channel about PTSD and more spiritual human potential matters. And then my Future Wise Energy, where I bring my experience in oil and gas and business investment and how that fared around the world to video and to viewers on Substack, TikTok, and YouTube. So that was a lot of production over this last year, writing all those, the content, delivering it, editing it, and producing it all myself. And then I also had finally, I write all the time, and I collected all this material, and I put together a 25 volume book series called the Awakening Chronicles, and had put that together and actually got informed to publish and got it out on the Kindle Amazon network, where you can subscribe to that and tap into that. It's a novel approach toward consciousness and the development of more awareness in your life. And then at year end, this kind of surprised me. I had some work that was laying around, and some people in town here in Austin just reminded me of some things that I'd kind of left laying on the table and hadn't brought fully forward. So I ended up putting together this book called The Gap in December. And the subtitle is Building Authority in a World of False Promises. And I use many of my experiences in athletics and business and life to illustrate how you can stay engaged in your own life, and how it actually is beneficial to use whatever circumstances that you've landed in your life, and notice how you're really feeling in contrast with some of the expectations that are presented in some of the systems that we enter, whether it's in a business environment or an educational or some cultural, maybe even a church setting, as to whether how your internal compass is gauging the promises that they've made, or your expectations of that system. And it could even also be applied to family systems and in relationships. I think any of the environmental factors that we've inherited, exploring the contrast between what you're noticing and feeling and focusing on versus the that external promise, so to speak, or expectation, is a powerful tool to use in your life. And so anyway, I really, I'm kind of proud of this. I think this may actually be succinct enough versus the 25 book series of consciousness evolution, which may appeal to a very minute segment of society, versus something like this, which is very practical. And I think it's very timely, because the issue that I've raised in the video that I just released, I think I put it out yesterday, and even illustrated it with some bullet points and highlights and framework to try to make sure that people can follow me. I think it's very, very timely because of all the transparency we're seeing. Just today I noticed that we're seeing into the civil unrest in Iran. And that kind of surprised me. Not that there's civil unrest there, but the fact that we're getting news about what's happening in Iran. And some of that information for years has been very guarded and was not really released to the public domain. So seeing that, raises the issue of, okay, well, what does that mean for me? Well, Iran is a geopolitically, charged area of the world. And obviously, we bombed them and to knock out nuclear warheads. And of course, they have access to a lot of resources. And we have had a number of foreign policy um, efforts over the years. You know, you may, if you're old enough, you might remember the Ayatollah Khomeini or Ayatollah um, or the Shah of Iran being extracted from that and it going to the, back to the kind of what we let go of some of the actors that we were sponsoring in the region, and it's gone over back to the Ayatollah Khomeini from the Shah of Iran. So anyway, there's a lot of economic distress, most likely due to low oil prices that are choking a lot of economies around the world. But seeing into Iran and the civil unrest there, and then seeing, our administration, um, kind of getting engaged in some public rhetoric or headlines about the region, I thought was fascinating. Point being, and getting back to the gap and how this applies to your life, the transparency that we have into world affairs these days can easily create a lot of stress and internal confusion and havoc. And a lot of people will probably say, well, what does Iran thing have to do with me? And I'm not going to address that in particular. I'm using the transparency of into Iran society today as something that's really new, and assuming that is the really happening there, which I don't have any evidence to believe that it's not. The issue is about the new information, the new transparency that we have. And this has been happening really deliberately over the last 10 to 15 years with celebrities, athletes, um, music stars. You look at the P Diddy thing, and you see someone that you may have loved his music, but now you have insight as to how this person, behaved behind the scenes. And you can love the music and not accept, that type of behavior. But nonetheless, the transparency creates a disturbance in us. And I think in our lives, we've all noticed things that, have made us see the difference between a promise and what we have to learn to, what a lot of us were taught we have to learn to accept in our lives. And the, the book speaks to the ability to maintain your integrity to yourself. Once you notice that gap between what's happening and what you really are noticing, and maybe if you're in touch with yourself enough, and understand what you really want, that puts you in a different situation, because knowledge or information, insight is powerful only to the extent that you can make something of it. And that's the intent of this new book that I've put out, and it's actually been the intent of my efforts much of my life, is to not only make observations that are powerful for advantages in business or athletics or human performance, but for my family to have greater insight, and all the people that I've worked with over the years, probably several thousand, whether they knew it or not. I've always been a lens as or hopefully a bright light into the real dynamics of what's happening around us, and also into what the potential of each person that I encounter might actually have. And when they invite you to look into their shadow, well, that's another matter. But um, can't make a, what is it? You can't make a horse drink, but you can lead him to water, something like that. So, and that leads me to, one of the things that I've really been working with was the concept, and this is from some feedback, that I was kind of an orphaned prophet, so to speak. And orphan meaning my expectation was not always that the deliverable that seemed to be called from me to deliver in the systems that I've encountered in my life didn't necessarily have the outcomes that other people were expecting. It's kind of like, and if you've read the Bible and you look at the book of Hebrews, I think it's the 11th chapter where there's a talk about how a lot of people that lived by faith didn't actually get what they, were promised or had hoped for. Well, I think at a spiritual level, they may have actually gotten it. But the fact is, on the surface, maybe the athlete didn't win the game, but, was God with them or against them? Well, that's really not something that I think God doesn't really act at the micro level, in the moment by moment, making, outcomes possible for people. I think there's a greater mechanism that he's put in place in our universe that works, that we need to tap into. And I think, I happen to believe a lot of those stories and metaphors are true, that we have been delivered through many of the writings of those people around Jesus at the time, as well as some other mystics. I think were tapped into God. I was having a discussion with somebody the other day, and I don't know where this question came from, but I thought, do you think God really just speaks one language? I mean, do you think if I say, church or Jesus or Baptist or Methodist or Lutheran or Muslim, that he knows? I'm sure in some respects, the language doesn't really matter, and that's my point. It's much more the matter of state that we find ourselves operating in, rather than the superficial labels that we put on ourselves that bring the real connection to God. And here I go again on my spiritual soapbox, but I think that's just a funny thing to explore, is how language can limit us or endear us or divide us. I think there's some root words around division and devil. And I think the things that bring us together and cause us to feel some unity without fear is more of a divine place to operate from, if that's your desire. I also found myself really attacking, that's an interesting word to use here, but violence, because I think dominance and violence are so active in our world today. Yet I believe that there's an innate part of me that would rather give people a hug rather than push them away, or even, force them to come to me. And it's that observation of life that, I kind of enjoy the fact that I don't have a lot of these superpowers from positions in government or authority, or now as a president or a CEO of a company. I really do have the luxury of having some time and space to respond to what's around me. And, it's an interesting position to find yourself in as an artist that is counting on, some things like this to provide a sense of an avenue of expression, as well as a potential income stream to feed me the next 2 days next week. So, I continue to operate in the real world with. I think I'm always building a resource that I can tap into to find some means to express. And most recently, it's been fascinating to explore the possibility of using some other modalities, because I think watching the Sean Diddy Combs um, documentary recently helped me realize how powerful it is that these lyrics and sound, are blended together to appeal to people, and they attract attention, so much attention and connection emotionally, viscerally, that really moves people. How can I not, potentially explore something like that? Because, people tune out to these narratives and the preaching, or the, some explanation of, that comes out as a academic or removed approach that's unrelatable, to find a way to reach people where they are, to help them not, fight against, because that's part of the message here in the gap is not about escape or resistance or conformity, but a fourth way of actually continuing to live your life, but taking great notice, of heightened awareness, a very strong level of consciousness as to what is happening outside of you and what's happening inside of you. Because I do believe that what happens inside of every one of us, when we really pay attention to it and do the work to distinguish between what we've been handed, which in many cases is a lot of anger over family systems and institutions that just don't work. And so you can, there's a kid that's born that finds he's angry at his mother and father. Well, a lot of times they don't even really know why, or they may actually when they're young enough, because their whole birthright is often being denied by the environment and by these traditions that have been handed down about the violence. I mean, these children, these infants, I do not believe that there is an inherent evil. I think there's the potential for most anything to be present in that organism that is going to carry a life that is formed and acting out. And today, here I am in my early 60s, 62, I guess it is, still ferreting out what I inherited versus, from my environment versus what I'm here to do. And reading the circumstances that unfold in my life and before the camera, and now that we have, the access to everyone in the world through social media, what type of feedback and expression, happens on these various platforms that are available. So that's, well, there's a couple of other things I'll just bring back because it came back to me just now about some things I brought up last week. And that was, on one hand, it's really cool to see these college athletics flourishing like it is, flourishing being, so, in the wake of everything else that's happening in the world, I think it can be a great escape. But if you look at football, for example, you're looking at a very violent sport, and kids that have put themselves at risk physically and also you invested their time and effort into something that may or may not work for them because number one, they may not, have the chance to, they may get injured. They could not be good enough, and they could invest heavily in with their body and their life into something that produces no economic benefit. I think there's a lot of other things that I learned from athletics that those are intangibles, but I felt like early on that I recognized um, that it was a kind of a slave and owner situation where the people that were running the sports and even the colleges back in the 80s when I was playing were uh, that you were playing with house money there, and the odds were not necessarily in your favor of ending up on top. And I had other options to get through school and get through life. And even though I was offered, a lot by some of the people that a lot of people idolize, um, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that call came from deep inside of me. But back to the point here about the slave and the owner situation, about the haves and have-nots. I think the music industry clearly took advantage of the rappers who had access to the deep connection to the human element, and they were bringing that out of the ghettos and bringing it forward, and they were being exploited as they became famous, but many of them still being taken advantage of by the system. And I think that's the transparency that we have now in the look back as to what happened in not only the rap industry, but also in various other niches of music and entertainment. And you can look at the beautiful people that could go to Hollywood if they'd have to sleep with or have sex with a director and stay quiet about it. And to get the role, to become famous, and to have a certain lifestyle and maybe get locked into a role, and they're no longer an artist, but they're just a celebrity that has a certain image that they have to maintain in every piece of work they do after that. So that may sound like a little bit of a jaded read on how society has operated, but I think we can all see these gaps in society and culture that have held us back from creating the better future that I think we'd all wish for our children or grandchildren and the future generations. So those are some insights that I shared last week, and I think they're probably coming off a little bit more positive this week because with just getting this book out there and starting to talk about it has given me some clarity into the hope that I think I've brought to many situations that really kind of defied the knowing of many of the people that have worked around me before. Although, I ended up getting taken down a few times because I didn't conform. I think ultimately, this may be the pinnacle of and the benefit of much of those efforts that I made that really failed in the maybe an old school way of looking at things, where I was really watching the uh, the powers that be, the institutions and the elite, some billionaires betraying themselves in kind of their arrogance and an illusion that they were actually creating something that was benefiting others. So God works in mysterious ways. There is a light and there's a dark, and I think he did create both sides. And I think it is up to us to navigate that and operate with dignity and integrity. I'm going to leave you with that. So I'm going to go break my fast, and I'll be back to see you again next week. All the best.